Hello, you are watching a series of interviews on the AFC activities. Today, we are having a special guest, Mr. Robin Butler. Mr. Butler is a partner at the Sturgeon Capital. Mr. Butler, welcome to our studio.
Thank you very much for having me.
And also, let's start our conversation from your background. Whilst learning about your biography, we've noted that you have a quite unique background in history, linguistics, and emerging markets. And what we are interested in is that how this unique background of yours influenced your decision making related to the venture capital investment within the Sturgeon Capital.
You can definitely say that I have a somewhat esoteric background for someone who works in venture. I always say that I kind of ended up doing this job by accident. So I studied Arabic and Middle Eastern history at university and spent a bit of time living in Jordan as part of that. And then went to live in Iran after that to learn Farsi, which was primarily for intellectual interest. But you could say I was a kind of historian linguist, but that's being maybe a bit generous. I wasn't a very good one. But I was always fascinated in sort of countries outside of the UK and Europe and the West. In the UK, when you're learning history, it's very European centric. You do mainly UK, Europe, a little bit of US, and the rest of the world is just kind of left, or certainly when I was studying history, it was sort of left as this kind of other. But when I got the time to spend a bit of 3 months or so in Jordan and traveled also in Tajikistan and Uzbekistan when I was 19, and I just found it fascinating, the Silk Road, how if you view the last 200 years as the anomaly and actually you look back on the sort of period of history before that, that everywhere between, let's say, Istanbul and Beijing, that was really the center of the world. So from an intellectual perspective, I'm fascinated in Central Asia and this region. And then what I say as well is that I'm lucky enough to get paid to travel to the countries that I want to go to on holiday anyway. I don't know to what extent the interest in the history of this region plays a part in the decision making at Sturgeon. Certainly the fact that I like coming here and I'm happy getting on an overnight flight to spend 24 hours somewhere certainly doesn't bother me. I still really enjoy it. But hopefully maybe that perspective a little bit on the kind of history and culture does help, at least in kind of understanding some of the things that are going on. And I wouldn't say I understand what goes on in the UK half the time, so I'm not even going to begin to claim that I understand the nuances of Kazakh or Uzbek society, but I'm certainly very interested and always open to learning. So I think it helps from a kind of mindset perspective to have more of an awareness of kind of the history and the nuances in this region. But there's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we're always learning.
Exactly.
Yeah. And also you've mentioned that you travel a lot and you live in the regions where Sturgeon Capital invests. And so our next question would be, how do you use your local experience to build trust and strong relationship with local founders and investors?
That's a good question. At the moment I live in Tbilisi, Georgia. I've been there since January. But for the last pretty much 3 years since kind of COVID restrictions were removed, I've been traveling between 50 to 70% of the time. Primarily sort of Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, but quite a few other countries as well. And what I found, and I think this is true everywhere, is when you go to someone's kind of home, like you actually make the effort to come and spend time where someone is, it makes a huge difference in the kind of their willingness to engage with you. And I think that's true anywhere in the world. If you're an American who comes to the UK or a Brit who comes to Kazakhstan, it still has that same impact that you've got on the flight, you've come a long way, and people appreciate it. And so it's a good way of, let's say, beginning to build a relationship and then coming back and showing that it's not just a one-off, that you do actually come back every couple of months, every month. Sometimes it's every 6 months, depending on the country. But people remember, and you start to get taken a little bit more seriously. Obviously, you then actually have to deliver on what you're saying you're going to do. But as a starting point, and people often ask, it's like, oh, well, what do you do if you want to start building an understanding of a country? It's like, well, I get on a plane.
Yeah.
I go and spend some time there, and you maybe arrive and you have 2 meetings. If you spend a week, you'll have 30 meetings, 40 meetings, because someone will say, you're here. Oh, you should meet so-and-so. And I'll say, oh, you must meet so-and-so. And then you start to see how things kind of fit together.
So yeah, you understand more when you are within the society rather than just observing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you. It's actually, it's very interesting. We could discuss a lot about traveling and background, but since we have more like financial podcast, yeah.
Yes.
Our next question will be, what emerging trends and the latest strategies in alternative investment funds, such as private equity, hedge funds, real estate, and the commodities, should professionals and the organizations be aware of?
So I suppose I'm probably most qualified to speak about venture capital, which is a subset of private equity, as that's the team at Sturgeon that I lead and where I've been working on for the last 5 years or so. And if you look at, say, kind of emerging trends, venture is prone to cycles, is prone to hype, prone often to over-exaggeration and bubbles. And I think we're in one at the moment with AI, which how intelligent it is another debate in many cases, but you're seeing huge amounts of capital flowing into businesses, claiming that they will be kind of revolutionizing certain industries, and often a lack of, I think, due diligence on really the business model and the team behind it. People FOMO is a big thing in venture. So that, I think, is what we've seen. If you look at the last 2 years or 3 years in venture, you had a boom post-COVID with kind of in a zero interest rate environment, huge amounts of capital flowed in. You then had this kind of funding winter, where people have been calling it, where sort of liquidity was sucked out of the market. A lot of companies have struggled to live up to the valuations they raised at previously at multiples that have since contracted significantly. But AI has been this kind of just this separate trend going on. So for actually, if you look beneath that, for more, I'd say, traditional technology companies, sort of e-commerce, B2B software, fintech businesses, there are a lot of very interesting companies doing very interesting things. However, they're struggling to raise capital. They're having to be far more efficient and to rely less on sort of external funding sources. Ultimately, I think the companies that come out of this period will be stronger as a result. And really, when I think about, if you look at many of the AI businesses that are operating today, I think over time they will tend towards the valuations that typical software businesses earn or command. So where today to say AI enabled makes you seem different, I think in the future to say you're AI enabled will be like saying you're internet enabled, everything will be. So how do you differentiate yourself? And still, I think you will differentiate yourself by really the problem that you're solving, how you build distribution, and the business model that you have built around that. And that's true of whether you're AI enabled in inverted commas or not at the moment and in the future. So I think while advice would be is for those looking at sort of venture funds or angel investments, a word of caution around anything which is sort of wrapping itself as being AI at the moment. I think if you don't have the domain expertise, maybe invest through someone who really does. But don't discount the other opportunities where, particularly in emerging markets, and kind of being here in Kazakhstan today, where there are still significant opportunities for technology to address many of the inefficiencies that affect people's day-to-day lives. Maybe inefficiencies that have been solved in part or in full in more developed markets, but still, particularly on the B2B software side, you can kind of look across both enterprise and SME being underserved by technology solutions here. So there are still opportunities outside of the kind of AI bubble, and actually now is quite an attractive time because valuations have rationalized.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you've said, artificial intelligence is moving towards becoming like a common thing that everybody will be using it, and it won't be like as innovative as now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what are the risks there? What do you think is popularity of AI is impacting in a good way, maybe investment sphere, or maybe there are some negative sides? Could you maybe share your opinion on this with us?
Well, so I think, I mean, if you look at it from an investment perspective, ultimately you're looking to generate returns. Now, there will be leaders that emerge from this the increased integration and adoption of artificial intelligence across the economy and society. Like undoubtedly, it is a new wave of technology, even if many of the actual underlying, much of the underlying technology is not new itself. It's just been kind of reconfigured and optimized with greater compute power. It will change a lot, and there will be companies that kind of win out of it. Now, what are the chances of you being the one to kind of pick that? Now, when the brightest and the best in the world are looking for these opportunities, chances are they're the ones that are going to kind of identify it and back it. So I think the risk is people getting caught up in hype around it and making investments which ultimately fall flat as and when the market rationalizes, which I'm sure it will. I mean, we've seen kind of swings in Nvidia's stock in the last couple of weeks to suggest that people are realizing maybe this company is a little bit overvalued. Maybe just, I mean, like if you look at the projections of what they need to achieve in the next however many years, or what revenue growth people are pricing in, is quite frankly outstanding, and I think outstrips just the physical capacity to actually manage GPUs. So a risk of getting sort of being caught by the tide going out when this bubble bursts. There are many questions on a sort of more societal and ethical level on the risks and the opportunities. That's, as you say, we're focusing on finance today, so we'll avoid going down that rabbit hole.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, in such a rapidly evolving industry, what strategies can professionals use to stay ahead of the curve? Because considering your extended experience, I believe our audience will be interested in your opinion on this.
It's maybe something that, I don't know, is slightly not going out of fashion a lot of the use cases of artificial intelligence at the moment are to summarize extensive material, kind of provide you with the key insights as determined by artificial intelligence. I still think there is a lot that can be taken from actually just reading about things and reading in long form. Artificial intelligence today is a kind of essentially a reversion to the mean. It picks out the sort of the most common things within something. It doesn't necessarily pick out the things that might be different. And if you want to kind of stay abreast of what's going on, but also try and be maybe slightly ahead of the curve, I still think there is a lot to be said for reading long form articles, reading books, listening to podcasts in full, rather than just relying on a couple of bullet points, because I think your retention level and sort of understanding in most cases is not as good when you just kind of rely on the sort of the short form version. So maybe it's a bit old fashioned, and maybe a lot of people don't have the time for it, but I'd say kind of reading about things, because it then triggers other points for you to kind of research into. Obviously it varies depending on what kind of field you're in. I guess in adventure, things can swing so wildly, and trends develop, they build, and then often they burst and break in probably shorter spaces of time than in other maybe alternative assets or real estate or private equity, which tends to be perhaps more stable and steady. I think one area is, it's interesting, we've had a couple of discussions recently with fellow investors on sort of how you can integrate AI into your own sort of investment process to increase the sort of the depth and breadth of the analysis one can do. There clearly are a lot of opportunities for it to automate perhaps the more mundane aspects of sort of the investment process. But again, to come back to that point, I still think doing the important part or a significant part of the work yourself really helps you understand what is actually going on, what are the kind of fundamentals and the key drivers for a business or an opportunity. So that, from a kind of Sturgeon perspective, while looking to integrate AI at different points in the investment process to increase our efficiency, not to let it take over the actual decision-making process itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually reading like full book or listening to the full podcast, that's an absolutely amazing advice in our age, because you do know, then you will know the context, and have full information to make your decision, rather than some kind of extracted points, which is maybe beneficial for some other authors of those shortened version.
Yeah, I think the sort of the summary points can make you sound smart at a kind of at a dinner party, or when you're talking with your friends, you can drop in this fact. You know so many little things about so many things, but actually what's your depth of understanding, I think, can be rather low. And the other thing is, you have to, if you really want to sit there and read a book for a while, you probably have to leave your phone in another room. Otherwise, just the temptation. Well,
just showing off it sometimes.
This 30 seconds turns into 5 minutes, and you've lost that kind of ability to concentrate.
So what books and the podcasts would you recommend related to the investment, or some maybe about finance in general?
For people wanting to kind of, let's say, better understand what we do, kind of investing in emerging markets, and why we believe there is such an opportunity in countries that are still predominantly offline, there's a very good book called Out Innovate by Alex Lazaro, which looks at this sort of questioning the idea that Silicon Valley is the only place that innovation can take place, and looking not only sort of outside of Silicon Valley in the rest of the US, but then looking at Latin America, looking at India, often at regions and countries that are more developed than the ones we're investing in, which kind of being Central Asia, the Caucasus, and Pakistan and Bangladesh. It's a very good book at sort of portraying. He uses he makes the analogy that rather than investing in unicorns, you should be investing in camels. His concept that camels can survive for very long periods in sort of very arduous conditions. However, when given the right resources, the right food and water, they're one of the fastest animals at full speed. So I think it's kind of an interesting analogy for companies in these markets that often have to survive with very little funding through geopolitical and macroeconomic instability, but ultimately over the long term, not only are able to survive, but to thrive. So if you're looking for kind of one book that we recommend on sort of investing in why venture in more emerging markets is something to be excited about, that's one that I would recommend.